Every healer who had ever stood before the Alpha King had done the same three things in the same order. They had bowed, they had reached for the scar, and then they had pulled back, quickly, as though the wound itself had all them on. Mirella did none of those things. She walked into the high stone chamber, set her satchel down on the bench beside the hearth, and did not bow at all. She looked at him. She looked at the long, pale line that travelled from his collarbone to the bottom of his ribs, the line that had refused every sound, every spell, every hand that had ever touched it. And then she said four words no one in this fortress had dared to say in a decade. Is it still hurt? The Alpha King did not answer. He was sitting on a low chair near the fire, his shirt unfastened because the council had told him this would be a healer's visit. He was a tall man, broad at the shoulder, dark-haired, with a face that had been called beautiful once, before the nightless scar had been carved into him. He was 34 years old. He had not slept a full night in 10 years. He could not remember the last time anyone had asked him a question to which he was the answer. And he did not answer this one. He simply looked at her, this small woman with brown hair tied back with a length of dyed wool, this stranger who had walked from a village 3 days east, and he could not find his voice. So Mirella waited. She did not fill the silence. She did not apologize for the question, or rephrase it, or pretend she had asked something else. She stood at the edge of the firelight, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, and she waited. Outside, snow was falling on the courtyards of the Iron Reach. A wolf howled somewhere far below the fortress walls, and another answered from the forest line. The fire in the hearth cracked softly. The Alpha King drew a breath that felt like it was the first one he had taken in a very long time. And finally, quietly, in a voice that had been used for issuing orders and signing death warrants and almost nothing else, he said, Mirella nodded once, as though this were a perfectly ordinary thing to say. "Then we'll find out," she said. And so begins the story of a grieving king, a healer who refused to flinch, and a wound that was never only his. His name was Torvald, and he had been Alpha King of the Iron Reach for 11 winters. The kingdom was vast and cold, a stretch of pine forest and stone villages climbing up into the mountains where the old wolves still ran wild. His pack respected him. His enemies feared him. The bards who passed through his halls sang of his battles and his judgments and his terrible, quiet mercy. The way he could spare a man's life with the same expression he wore when ordering an execution. What the bards did not sing about was the scar. The scar had appeared on the night his younger sister, Saoirse, had died, and it had appeared on him, not on her. Saoirse had been 17, ambushed in the eastern wood by raiders who had been hunting Torvald himself and had taken her instead. By the time he reached her, she was already gone. He had carried her body home through the snow, and when he had stripped his bloodied shirt off in his chamber that night, the long, pale line had been there from collarbone to ribs, exactly where her killing wound had been. It had never closed, and it had never been alone for long. In the years since Saoirse's death, every time someone on his lands had died of a wound he had prevented, every village taken by raiders he had not reached in time, every child lost to a winter that had come early, a new mark had risen on his body. A line on the back of his hand for the boy who had drowned in spring he was born on the southern border. A pale circle on his shoulder for the woman struck down in a tavern brawl his guards had not intervened in. He carried 37 of these now. He had counted. His healers had given them a name in whispers, in the corridors when they thought he could not hear. The inheritor's mark. The wound the land gave its king when its king was another. He had not let a healer touch the original scar in 7 years, until now. Mirella worked slowly. She knelt on the woven rug by his chair and asked his permission in the simplest words to touched the skin near the scar, and he gave it a single nod. Her hands were warm, her fingers were steady. She traced the edge of the long, pale line with the back of one knuckle, the way someone might trace the edge of a frozen river to test the ice, and she did not flinch. "His home," she said, not a question, an offering. 10 meters, she said. He looked at her sharply. The other healers had pretended the smaller marks were old battle wounds. They had not asked. "Newer," he said. She nodded. She did not ask him to explain. She reached into her satchel and brought out a small clay jar, and she warmed a fingerful of pale salve between her palms before she touched the long scar with it. The salve smelled of pine resin, something else, something green and clean. "Tell me when it hurts," she said. She worked along the line of the scar with the warm salve, and at first he felt nothing. He had not felt anything along that scar in 10 years. It was numb in a way that had once seemed merciful, but had come, over time, to feel like something more terrible than pain. And then, halfway down, near the place where the wound had been deepest on his sister's body, he felt a small, bright sting, like the first claw of a frostbitten finger, and he made a sound he had not made in a decade. It was not a groan, it was a breath that caught. Mirella stopped at once. "There," she said. I could not speak. "That is good. A scar that hurts can heal. A scar that does not has to be taught how first." She lifted her hand away. She did not look at him with pity. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a riverbed in summer, when the water has finally begun to return. With patience, with attention, with the steady expectation that something long absent might come back. He had been prepared to be feared. He had been prepared to be flattered. He had been prepared even to be hopeful. He had not been prepared to be looked at like that. And so, for the first time in 10 years, the Alpha King of the Iron Reach closed his eyes in front of another person, and he let her hand return to his skin. She came every day for a week. She slept in a small chamber off the great hall that had been a guest room before it stopped being used. The better, Roderick watched her come and go with a face that gave nothing away, and the court watched her with faces that gave a great deal. She was a woman grown, 22 by her own quiet account, of marriageable age, active, a healer who had buried both her parents and run her grandmother's house alone for 3 winters until the call from the fortress had reached her. She was not a noble, she was a witch. She was a human woman, walking into a wolf king's hall every morning with a satchel of dried herbs and a question no one else had dared to ask. The court did not know what to do with her. Lady Halvin knew exactly what to do with her. Halvin was the sister of Torvald's own mother, his aunt by blood, his rival by ambition. Her son, Brandon, was 16, and Halvin had decided 10 years ago that Torvald would not live long enough to take a lunar or siren heir, and therefore Brandon would inherit. She had based her entire life on this assumption. She had married her son to the daughter of the Southern Alpha 3 months ago, in preparation for the day she had been quietly counting down to. A village healer who could touch the king's scar without flinching was, in Halvin's view, an obstacle. She came to the great hall on the 8th morning, just as Mirella was climbing the steps with her satchel, and she stopped on the landing. "I do not believe we have been introduced," Halvin said. Mirella curtsied. "You are the healer?" "I am." "From a village?" "From Verer, yes." "And the king has been letting you put your hands on him?" Halvin's voice was perfectly even, perfectly polite. "How interesting." Mirella said nothing. "I would like to be very clear with you," Halvin went on, "since I imagine no one else in this fortress has been. The king is not a man you heal. He is a man you survive. The last healer who believed she could undo what was done to him left this place with her hands shaking so badly she could not hold a cup. She does not practice anymore. Do you understand me? I understand you, my lady. Good. Alvin smiled. It was a beautiful smile. Then you will not mind if I tell you also that the salve in your jar will be examined by my own physician this afternoon, as a precaution. Of course, my lady. You may go. Mirella did not tell the king about the conversation. She climbed the rest of the stairs to his private chamber, set her satchel down, and asked him, as she did every morning, whether the night had been easier than the last. He said, "It was." She said, "Good." There is a thing that happens when a man who has not been touched in a decade is touched, every morning, by the same pair of hands. It is not what the songs say. It is slower than that. It is the slow undoing of a hand. By the second week, Torvald slept 3 hours in a row for the first time since Saoirse had died. By the third week, he found himself, mid-council, looking at the door instead of at the maps on the table, because Mirella had walked past on her way to the herb garden, and her shadow had crossed the threshold. By the fourth week, he stopped Roderick on the stairs and said, very quietly, "I think the inheritor's mark is fading. It's a boy who drowned. The line on my hand is paler this morning." Roderick, who had served 3 Alpha Kings and had never seen this one's face do what it was doing now, did not answer immediately. When he did, all he said was, "I see, my king." But his eyes followed Mirella for the rest of the day. If you were with me this far, if you were still listening, still leaning into this fire, this slow, dangerous mending, please tap the like button. It tells the algorithm to keep finding the listeners who want stories like this one. And then come back, because what happens next is part of the story I have been afraid to tell. It happened on a morning that had been ordinary until it was not. Mirella was warming the salve between the columns of the king's chamber. Torvald was sitting in his low chair, his shirt loose, his eyes half closed in the way they had begun to close around her. When she paused with her hand halfway to the long scar, he made a small sound. "What is it?" he asked. She did not answer. He sat up. "Mirella." She turned her hand over. On the inside of her right palm, where she had been warming the salve every morning for nearly a month, there was a faint, pale line. Not a cut, not a burn. A scar, silver, soft-edged, exactly the length and shape of the small old scar on the back of his right hand. The one that belonged to the boy who had drowned. She looked up at him. He looked down at her hand. And the room, which had been the warmest room in the fortress for a month, went cold. "How long has it been there?" he asked. "It was not there yesterday." "Mirella." "I know." She closed her hand. She did not close it in fear. She closed it the way a woman closes a fist around something she has decided. "This is not your wound," he said. "I know." "It is mine. They are all mine. Every mark on my body is a person I failed to." "I know what they are, Torvald." It was the first time she had said his name. He had not realized, until she said it, that no one had said it without a title in front of it for 10 years. He sat back in his chair, very slowly. "You have to stop," he said. "You cannot come here anymore." "No." "Mirella." "No." She stood up. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "I have not asked you what these marks are. I have not asked whose names are written in their paper. I have my guesses, and I have my respect, and I have not questioned. I am telling you now, I will not stop coming to this chamber because the curse decided to share itself with me. I will decide what I do with my hands, not the curse, not you, me." He stared at her. She picked up her satchel. She did not leave. She set the satchel back on the bench. She unfastened the strap, brought out the clay jar of salve, warmed a fingerful between her palms, including the palm that now bore a stranger's scar, and walked back to his chair and knelt. "Tell me when it hurts," she said. He told her 3 times that morning. Each time she stopped, waiting, and went on. When she left the chamber at midday, the small gold line on the back of his right hand was gone. The boy's name, the one Thorvald had carried for 9 years, was no longer written on it. It was written faintly on the ground. That night, he did not sleep at all. Not because of pain, because of the other thing. The next morning, he was waiting for her at the door of her small chamber off the great hall. He had not slept, and it showed. He looked at her once and said, "There is something I have not told you." "I know," she said. "You do not know all of it." "Then tell me." So, he told her about Saoirse and the eastern wood and the snow he had carried her through. He told her about the small ones and the cabin and the name he had given each in private, because if he was going to wear the dead, he would at least know who he was wearing. There were 37. 2 had begun to fade since she had started touching them, and now there was the line on her own palm. He told her he had not let anyone touch the long scar in 7 years, because the last healer who had tried had wept for a week afterward, dreaming his sister's death every night, and he had decided then that he would carry it alone. He told her, finally, in a voice that did not entirely belong to him, that he had not thought it was possible to want anything, and that he was afraid of what was happening to him, because he had wanted things once when he was young, and every single one was taken away. Mirella listened without interrupting. When he was finished, she said, "I am not Saoirse. I know. I am also not a woman." "I know that too." "And what am I, Thorvald?" He could not answer. She did not push him. She put on her cloak, and she said, "I am going to the herb garden. The frost killed the rosemary last night. Walk with me." He walked with her. They did not touch. They walked 3 paces apart, the way the king walked with his beater. And yet every wolf they passed in the corridor stopped what it was doing and watched them go by. Because the king of the Iron Reach had not walked through his own halls beside another person. It was that walk Lady Halvin saw from the upper gallery. It was that walk that decided her. Halvin moved on a Tuesday. She invoked an old pact law, nearly forgotten but real, written in the iron books of the fortress, that allowed any blood relative of the reigning Alpha to call for a council of witness if they believed the Alpha had been compromised by foreign magic. She had a southern physician who would testify that the king's body was changing in unnatural ways. She had 3 minor lords who owed her favors, and she had a sealed jar of Mirella's salve, which her physician had declared, falsely, to contain the bone dust of a dead human child. The council of witness was convened on the 5th morning of the 3rd month. Mirella was summoned to stand before it. She walked into the great hall with her satchel in her steady hands, and she stood in the firelight at the center of the wolf-carved floor while Halvin, in front of the entire court, lifted the sealed jar and accused her of working necromancer's craft in the body of the Alpha King. If the council found her guilty, the punishment was burning. "My lady," she said, when she was permitted to speak, "I have used that salve on my own grandmother. I have used it on shepherds with frostbite. I have used it on a child in my village last summer who had been cutting up her dwarfs. There is no bone dust in it. There is pine resin, witch hazel, beeswax, a pinch of ground iris root, and the milk of a goat's milk, who is currently very much alive in my barn at Bury, and who will be extremely annoyed if you have made me make it. A few wolves in the back of the hall laughed before they could stop themselves. Halvin's face. "The physician has tested it," she said. "His findings stand." "Then test it again," Mirella said, "in front of the king, with a He's choosing. I will stand here while you do it. Calvin smiled. That is not how this council works. No, said Torvald. The hall went still. He had been sitting on his throne in the dark furs of his office, and he had not spoken since the council began. And now he stood up. He walked down the steps of the dais. He did not stop on the lower step, the way Alpha Kings traditionally did when addressing the council from a position of authority. He walked all the way to the floor. He walked across the wolf-carved stone until he was standing beside Morella, 3 paces from her, the way they had walked in the corridor the week before. And then he turned and he faced his court. My aunt, he said quietly, is correct. There is foreign magic in this fortress. There has been for 10 years. It is mine. It is on my body. It is the thing I have been carrying since the night my sister died. And it is the thing none of you have asked me about, because none of you wanted to know the answer. This woman asked. She is the first person in a decade to ask. She is also the only person whose hands have made any of those marks lessen. If the council wishes to burn her for that, the council may try. He did not raise his voice. But before it does, let it be witnessed that I, Torvald of the Iron Reach, declare this woman blameless of harm done to my person. Let it be witnessed that she has my protection, by my word and by my throne. And let it be witnessed, and here, finally, his voice did something that all have never heard it do before. That if she chooses, after all of this, to walk out of this fortress and never return, I will not stop her. She owes me nothing. She owes none of you anything. She came when she was called, and she has done what no one in this hall could do. The only debt in this room is mine. The hall did not move. Calvin's hand holding the sealed jar was not entirely steady. My king, she began. Sit down, Clint. She sat down. It was the sitting down that did it. The lords saw it. The wolves saw it. The court of the Iron Reach watched the woman who had been quietly preparing to inherit their throne sit down at her nephew's quiet command. And they understood, all at once, that the count she had been keeping for 10 years had ended. The council was dismissed before sundown. The sound, tested by 3 healers of Torvald's choosing, was found to contain exactly what Morella had said it contained, including a single pale goat hair which she identified dryly as belonging to Henna. But what had been quiet healing for weeks became, the moment Torvald spoke aloud the truth of his curse in his own great hall, something else. The land had heard him. The curse had heard him. And it did not intend to be named without a fight. It came for him at the 3rd hour of the morning. Mirella was not in her chamber. She'd been awake, unable to sleep, walking the corridor outside the king's door, and so she heard the sound that came from inside, a sound she had never heard a man make, and she did not knock. She opened the door. Torvald was on the floor. The long scar from collarbone to ribs was open, not bleeding, opening, as though it were unhealing in reverse. The wound that had carved itself onto him on the night Saoirse died returned to claim him properly 10 years later. Frost was forming along the edges, real frost, white and crystalline, climbing across his skin from the wound outward, the way ice climbs across a window in winter. His breath was coming in short, hard pulls. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, and they were the eyes of a man who had decided 10 years ago that this was always how it was going to end. Morella crossed the room. She knelt beside him. She did not call for a healer. She did not call for Peter. She put her hands on his chest, on either side of the opening scar, and she said his name. Torvald. His eyes moved, just slightly. Torvald, look at me. He looked. The frost was reaching her hands now. It climbed across her knuckles, white and bright, and and it burned. She felt it bite into the bones of her fingers, into her wrists, the cold of it deeper than any winter she had walked through. The scar on her own palm, the boy's scar, flared bright with it, as if something in her was being asked to pay a debt she had not signed for. She did not lift her hands. "You're not going to die in this room," she said. "Not tonight. Not on my watch. Mirella, I have a girl named Penna who is waiting for me to come home. I told her I would. So you are going to keep breathing while I work." The frost climbed past her wrists, bit into her forearms. The pain of it was something she had no language for. She could feel her teeth wanting to chatter, but refusing to. She bent her head. "I see you, Torvald of the Iron Reach," she said, very quietly. "I see all 37 of them. I see Sasha. I see the boy who drowned, and the woman in the tavern, and the child kicked by the horse. I see every name you have been carrying. They are not yours to carry alone anymore. You understand me? Not anymore." The frost reached her shoulders. Her vision blurred, and then, slowly, the way ice gives up a river in spring, the way a held breath finally releases, the long scar on his chest began to close. Not heal, close. Knit itself shut along its own old line, as though it had been waiting all these years for permission. The frost pulled back from her arms, from his chest, from the floor between them. It receded the way a tide goes out, leaving the stone of his chamber damp and gloomy, and the air of the room finally warm. Torvald drew a breath that was the first whole breath he had taken in 10 years. His chest rose. It fell. The long scar, where it had been, was gone. In its place was a thin, pale line, no different from any other old wound on a man's body. A memory of pain, not its open mouth. 36 other small marks, scattered across his arms and shoulders and back, were also gone. Only one remained, the faintest one, the first one, the line that had run from collarbone to ribs. It was on Mirella's palm now, mirrored in miniature, silver and soft. She looked at it. She closed her hand around it. "I'll keep this one," she said. He could not speak. He reached for her hand. He turned it palm up in his own. He bent his head, and he pressed his forehead to the small silver line. He stayed there for a long time, while the fire in the hearth burned low, and the wolves on the walls of the fortress, who had been silent for 10 winters, began, one by one, to howl. The kiss, when it happened at dawn. It was not in the great hall. It was not in front of the court. It was on the stone steps of the herb garden, where the rosemary had died in the frost. The sun was just rising over the eastern wood. He was standing 3 paces from her, the way he always stood, and she crossed the space he had kept between them, and she lifted her face to his. What broke open in him was not desire, not thirst. What broke open in him was the understanding that he had been allowed, at last, to want something and be answered. That a hand had reached for him and had not been taken from him. That a woman had walked into his fortress with a satchel of pine resin and beeswax, and asked him a question no one else had dared, and had stayed long enough for the answer to arrive. He kissed her once, quietly, as though he were learning a word in a language he had been told all his life he did not speak. When he drew back, she was smiling. "Does it still hurt?" she said. He laughed. It was the first time the Iron Reach had heard its king laugh in 11 winters, and the sound carried all the way down to the kitchens. The coronation of Mirella of Vereth as Luna of the Iron Reach was held on the first warm morning of spring. She wore no jewels. She had refused them. She wore a plain dress of dyed wool, the colour of new pine, and she carried her satchel because she had told Torvald that morning that she was not going to stop being a healer for anyone, including a king. And he had said only, "Good." He placed the silver crown on her head himself. He did not kneel, that was not the custom, but he bowed his head to her in front of the entire court. He spoke her name with a title no one had expected to hear. Mirella, my Luna, the keeper of my mouth. The hall did not breathe. And then, first from Roderick, then from the lords, then from the gathered pack, then from the wolves on the walls, the howl rose. Not a war howl, not a mourning howl. The other one a pack gives when it has been given a queen. Lady Halvin was not present. She had been removed from court the morning after the council, given a small holding in the southern reaches with strict instructions not to return. Her son, Branwen, who, it turned out, had wanted no part of any of this, had remained at the fortress as Torvald's ward, taking up his studies under Roderick. 3 months later, on a warm afternoon in the herb garden, a letter arrived. It was from Halvin. Mirella read it in the sun, with Henna, the goat, who had been brought up from Bereath and had become, against all expectations, a fixture of the fortress kitchen yard, chewing placidly at the hem of her cloak. The letter was short. It said only that Halvin had heard the tales from the southern shore, of the king who slept now and laughed sometimes, and of the Luna who wore no jewels but a small silver line on her palm. It said that Halvin had been wrong. It said she did not expect forgiveness, but wanted it written in her own hand, so that it would be in the archives of the Iron Reach when she was no longer alive to be questioned about it. Mirella folded the letter once. She did not weep. She did not smile. She tucked it into her satchel and went on for the afternoon. That night, in their chamber above the great hall, Torvald asked her what she meant to do with the letter. Keep it, she said. Why? She turned her hand over. A small silver line on her palm caught the firelight. Because everything I keep, she said, I keep on purpose. He took her hand. He turned it palm up in his own, the way he had done in the chamber on the night the curse had nearly taken him. He did not bow his head this time. He looked at her. Does it still hurt? He asked. No, she said. Not anymore. The wolves on the walls were silent. The fire in the hearth was warm. Thank you for listening to me. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me, where are you listening from? And what was the line that stayed with you? Subscribe for more stories from the Iron Reach, and I will see you by the next fire.